Since our time is limited, we only have strictly 30 minutes. We are going to start now. I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Alec Couros, who came all the way from Canada, University of Regina, and he's a professor of educational technology at the Faculty of Education. And he is concerned with his researching and also delivering public speeches, and he's very popular as a policy advisor on topics such as digital identity, digital literacy, digital ethics, cybersecurity, you name it. So I, for one, am very excited about his presentation, and I'm sure you will join me. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Alec. If you are tweeting this session, his ID is Couros A.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know it's late in the day, and I'm excited that you're here to learn more about post-truth and finding critical literacy. I'm not used to a half-hour session, so it's a bit confining in some ways, but I'm going to try to get through it and hopefully stimulate you in some ways and give you a different perspective on media literacy education. So a bit about my context, that's me. I spend a lot of time online. I'm a connected educator, I believe. Again, you can find me on Couros, C-O-U-R-O-S-A on Twitter if you'd like. I'm from a small province of Saskatchewan. Our entire province is only about 1 million people, but somehow I've been able to connect from there across the world. It's been one of those great joys of the Web 2.0 world that no matter where you are, it doesn't matter where you're connected. A big part of what I do with my graduate students and undergraduate students is I help them create value in the world in terms of developing educational resources that are openly available. So you will see lots of work from my students, very open and hopefully useful to others that they might. So developing open educational resources is a big part of that. I'm also a devoted father of 4, and seeing them grow into the world is a big part of this, trying to get them to understand what this world is like, and for me to understand their world through their eyes is a big part of what I do. For instance, my 4-year-old, she's an avid YouTube star, and she's a bit older right now, but that was her first video. If you're ever looking at developing or getting better with your makeup, or you have someone that would like to know more, she's the one to find out there. But a big part of this is really about this philosophy about thinning the walls of classrooms and thinking about how we can better engage in our both university classrooms and our K-12 classrooms in better understanding the world around us, and that's including the digital world, and slowly allowing our students to thin the walls into these spaces, to move from private to public, from classroom to the world. And that's been a big part of my work, and hopefully through understanding the world of information a bit better, this will make some sense to you. So there are some key problems in the world of information literacy. The first thing that, of course, has been true since at least 2005 and much earlier, the best thing about the internet is that it gives everyone a voice. It's also the absolutely worst part of the internet, right? That giving everyone a voice has caused all sorts of problems. We don't have quality control. We have so much information that it's very difficult to get through it. And we live in what we would call a post-truth world. We have post-truth politics. If you want to look at exactly what post-truth might mean, and by the way, you have access to all of these slides afterwards. Just send me a tweet and I'll give you a link, so you don't have to take them all down. I promise I'll give it everything for you. Post-truth, in relating to or denoting circumstances with objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. It's just the idea that facts matter less than they did 10 or 20 years ago. At least that's what it seems to be in the political space as well. So for instance, if you see something like an inauguration photo, you might believe the factual one to the left, or the non-factual one, or sorry, the non-factual one to the right, the factual one to the right and the non-factual to the left if you're looking at the latest inauguration. But without information literacy skills, you may not be able to care or tell or even care whether or not one is the truthful one or one is not the truthful one when you look at the idea of truth. Information abundance is a big part of this. As I mentioned before, McLuhan talked about this in the 60s, Marshall McLuhan. He said, what are the effects of living with the electric information? I loved that term back there. is that we live habitually in a state of information overload. There's always more than you can cope with. And thinking about what the 60s might have looked like, some of you had firsthand experience, but thinking about how that was different in terms of information literacy compared to today. Today, when you go to keynotes, people often talk about how much content is constantly being made in all of these different spaces. And of course, for technical companies, they've decided that they know best for the way that we should filter information, and so they've created the tools for us. Unfortunately, these have been what are called filter bubbles. And so most of you have probably seen this YouTube. If you haven't, this video, this TED Talk, Eli Pariser, where he introduces the idea of the filter bubble, which is basically these spaces where we're fed information that social media companies think will like or that'll be relevant to us, but we don't necessarily have a choice of what we see. And that's become a real issue, especially when you get boxed into particular political or cultural beliefs, for instance. So a filter bubble, when you look at this illustration, you might be looking for news about climate change and news about business regulation, and the algorithms, based on what you've searched for before, will change the shape of those search results. So if you've been mostly right-leaning, you might see a pro-business story. If you've been mostly left-leaning, you might see a pro-environment story. And so the news, even what your students will get served to them, even with the exact same Google searches, will depend on their histories. And we have to understand that not all information, not all Google searches are exactly the same. And what you see in your feeds, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc., is really much on what you've been doing, what you've said to your Alexa, what you've said to your Amazon Home, all of those things brought in together in that way. And there are tools out there that kind of give you a sense of this. This is actually I went to politicecho.org, so you can tell where I'm leaning, I guess, for the most part. And I know that for the most part, I see less and less. And if you see to the right, those are mostly my high school friends, I think. There's a few of them on Facebook. This actually looks at and analyzes, and every one of those persons is a particular dot and kind of puts them on a particular space of where you might lean on the web. And this is basically most of the people that I connect with are mostly on the left. And of course, if we take this issue of filter bubbles and then we take the psychological effect of confirmation bias, we basically get students that search something like this, basically looking at this idea that, for the most part, we can be very lazy searchers, and if we're looking for that idea, if we're looking to win that debate we're having on Twitter or with our classmates, for the most part, we'll take the first link that actually makes sense to us or that fits within our worldview. Fake news, of course, big issue these days. If you look at the definitions, there's a number of competing definitions about fake news. Merriam-Webster takes a very factual, very literal definition. Fake news is quite simply news, material reported in a newspaper that is fake, basically, ultimately looking at this news that is fake. And so this goes back to even things like, the National Enquirer and other the tabloids. You see something like that where the bat child is found in a cave. Like, for the most part, if you're savvy enough, you can tell by the font there's something wrong here, beyond the content itself. And if you want to know what happened, there was even more. But these were, they hit newsstand. For the longest time, we pretty much knew fake news was fake news, but it was entertaining for the most part. The money power definition is a different type of fake news. So false news stories, often of a sensational nature, created to be widely shared online for the purpose of generating ad revenue via web traffic or discrediting public figures, political movements, or companies. And this is really the fake news that we're dealing with for the most part. And you can look at examples. There was in early 2016, there was examples of, this is actually late 2016, examples of young people basically using Google AdSense accounts and creating all sorts of fake propaganda type blog posts, news stories, and so on that looked fairly real. So you take a place like Belarus, Macedonia, small population, small GDP, and you look at someone like Boris, for instance, that was the name that gave him, the journalists gave him, checking his AdSense revenue, made over 18,000 USD for a couple of pro-Trump fake news stories. So you see the opportunity there. Someone in this particular context might not care about the politics of the US and perhaps might even feel that it's good that he may be doing this, but it just shows the power that when everyone has the ability to publish anything, we can see immense power in this. We see other examples, and beyond the individual, there's sites like this, for instance. This is the GMF, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, that tracks things that, for instance, when they're here's actually from their page, they have something called the Authoritarian Interference Tracker, which tracks authoritarian, for the most part, pro-Russian examples of where Twitter bots are used, for instance, for infiltration or particular stories and so on. And of course, it's not just from that, but you can see the number of countries that are selected in this. And so understanding the mass propaganda campaigns that exist is really important, but it's something that we have to deal with all of this. Garry Kasparov, one of my favorite tweets from him, the point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform or push an agenda, it is to exhaust your critical thinking, to annihilate the truth. And this is what's happening to students every single time. We've lost the ability to critical think because there's just too much information out there. And of course, beyond this, it's our human nature that causes some problems here. So for instance, Mark Twain years ago said, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. We tend to like the fake, especially if it fits our political views. We tend to like the fake, the fabricated, I can't believe this is true sort of thing because we believe it's true. And by human nature, we often bring these things in. So when it comes to internet scams, that's a whole other piece that I've had a lot of first-hand experience with in a bad way. So for the last 12, 13 years or so, my photos that have been on the internet, most of them that were uploaded to a site called Flickr back in the day where everyone just shared everything, where have been used in catfishing scams, if you've ever heard of that before. So basically, they're catfishing scams. They are photos of me. I'm on like every dating site out there, and all sorts of different profiles. Dating sites I had no idea existed, and this is how they do it. So one is psychological tricks. So for instance, here's not me. This is a fake profile reported. I get 2 or 3 a day of reports from victims who have found me, who have sent money, fallen in love, whatever it might be. But one of the things is they use psychological tricks. So here's a fake one. I'm from Hamburg in this case. I'm widowed, so often I've lost my wife in childbirth or something, a very tragic story, and I am a very loving father. So of course these are, so the best photos out there of us are on social media, but when they're used by someone else, not such a great thing. Here's another example. Alex Gellert, from a conference photo in this particular case. I live in Miami this time. What happens though, they create these networks of falsification. Like this is my actual real daughter. So they found her photos, they connected these Facebook profiles, created a whole narrative. This is my real mother, another Facebook profile. So it becomes more true when you see this person connected in different ways. And they even use really emotional photos, like my mother actually mourning over my real dad's grave. Like stuff like this is where you get this incredible emotional effect and you are able to trick people in these different ways. And so the types of photos that you put out there can be very deceiving to others when used improperly. Or of course, I might have been in an accident. That's not my face. It's really bad Photoshop. But I mean, someone believed it. Lots of fake profiles, especially like the signals of authority or authenticity you'll often see. So this is one of many passports that I've seen out there. If you're a passport expert, you probably can figure out, actually, there's so many of these things that are great for information literacy passwords, or for classroom activity, sorry. So you see signals of authority. This one was used in a Shadi.com, which is something I didn't know. It's an Indian matrimonial site. So I was married off, apparently, to someone, because I was a good U.S. man. They were looking for a good U.S. man to marry their daughter. They lost like 20,000 U.S. In a scam like this. This is me. I live in Beverly Hills, apparently, in another scam. Sometimes I have render a great help foundation. So charitable organizations, other organizations. There's me with my family. I'm doing a real great job. I'm also very spiritual and Christian in this particular sense. Then there's me as a general, apparently. Right? I've seen all sorts of ones that are just absolutely horrible. So the person who found this used Google reverse image search. You know what that is? Where you take a photo and you reverse image search, and they're able to find the real person who is like a General Mayville. And so even things like that, understanding like taking a photograph and reverse image searching it will give you a better sense of how, in fact, I can show you exactly what that looks like here. So for instance, if you see a fake profile, so all students, all adults should know this, you can take that photograph, drag it onto the desktop, and then you can go to images.google.com. And if that's an image that's been used on the web, this is a way of actually finding out where it might be used. So in that particular photo, you will see in a search very quickly that you'll see a number of pictures where this has been used in scams. Really great in also finding the origins of photos, how long a photo's been uploaded, who's the original uploader, all sorts of really great ways of using a tool like that. As I mentioned, even with more deception, these technologies of deception, these are some examples of some of the messages I get. Often they're not English speakers, so in this particular sense, someone had sleepless nights. He made me believe that he's true everything because we already had a video call. So I'm like scratching my head. This is a few years back, and I'm thinking like, a video call? Like, how could you possibly had a video call? And there's someone else who had a video call, another person. They're telling me they had video calls with me, and I'm confused here. Now, I'm an online educator, so I've got lots of videos of me basically looking at the camera and teaching, right? I'm talking to the camera. So there's lots of videos out there. I'm an open educator. I've taught MOOCs, taught tons of videos. Take a tool like Manycam. And I'm not saying Manycam is a bad tool, if there's any Manycam vendors here. But this is a tool that basically allows you to basically use your camera for video clips, for screen sharing, whatever it might be. So if you grab my YouTube video of me teaching, you plop it into there, you turn off the audio, you speak over it, and pretty soon you've got a fairly convincing, even if it's like 10 seconds or 30 seconds and the audio doesn't quite line up, it's good because most of these scammers, they live in the North Sea where they're oil people, and they just happen to be able to connect with you for 10 or 15 seconds. That's enough to create a belief, because seeing is believing. So this idea, these types of scams, very, very prevalent. And by the way, if you want to know how these are done exactly, I have got lots of YouTube videos that talk more about this idea of crime, but it's amazing how prevalent this is. Then this gets worse. I mean, we're getting to the point where this is Manycam of using prefabricated videos. In the next few years, this is actually, if you can see the multiple authors, several from Germany and Stanford University as well. This is something called real-time face capture. So basically what this allows you to do is take video. So you have video. This is the researcher up in the top left. This is a George Bush reel here. And you can see as he turns his face, it basically morphs into this third rendering of someone. And this is something that you could project live over Skype or Zoom or whatever technology are you using. Now, it's not ready to go at a consumer level, but now it's at a university today, but tomorrow it's going to be an app that you download, right? The #1 app where you can do this sort of thing. This is already something available if you've heard of deepfakes. Basically, if you have enough photos of anyone, you can take any video out there and basically render their face on top of it. And the big use of this has been so far, there's been Reddit forums, which have now been disabled or banned, where they take famous actresses and they basically take them and superimpose their faces on adult entertainers, so on pornography, for instance. And that's been one of the big things at this point. Down the road, we've got Voco. Adobe is kind of holding back on releasing this, but basically we'd be able to take a fingerprint of your voice and reproduce any sentences you want. This is something that's around the horizon as well in terms of, but they're, because of security reasons, they're not actually bringing this up. You've probably seen Google being able to use AI to make reasonable phone calls. AI is real, and it's getting better all the time. And maybe you've even seen this idea of the world's first AI news anchor that was unveiled out of China just a few days ago, or a couple weeks ago, I guess. So all of this coming together, it makes it more and more difficult for us to actually know what's real. And this is really a big problem. So in terms of rethinking media and info literacy, why it matters, one of the big issues is students don't take the time to actually to learn, like actually to dig into the information, for instance. So there was a fairly important Stanford study that looks at undergrad students, and I think some high school as well. Only 20% of the students could identify credible versus non-credible information, and provide reasoning. They could not come up with ideas of why this may or may not be credible. Like they've lost their imagination in that sense. So for instance, they were given an image like this that showed up on a site called Imgur, which is basically just a photo sharing site that was popularized by Reddit. And you can see the username that uploaded this site. They gave them this, and they said, tell me whether you think this is a credible photograph or not. Students were stuck in terms of the way that, what could you say about what would allow this to be credible or non-credible? And it was really interesting. And through this study, if you look at it, there's actually a number of different examples they use, and they show the results. Other examples, I think is really important. This is probably one of the bigger reasons it's important, not just student competencies, but could you imagine if we have one of these fake videos and this video says we're going to war with whoever on a tweet or whatever it might be, or get your guns out, those conservatives are coming to get us, or those Democrats are coming to get us, or whatever it might be. You can see that sort of thing causing all sorts of alarm, and it's one of the big issues when we start to look at the global scale. So I'm a big proponent of authentic examples. We know that media literacy is one of the best ways of dealing with this, and we have to strengthen our media literacy programs. We know that political knowledge, if you have political knowledge, it tends to be partisan for the most part. It doesn't help. Media literacy education is the key to a lot of this, and so we need to strengthen these media literacy programs. Unfortunately, when you go to, say, a K-12 classroom, they show you examples like this. So here, this is it's kind of a funny example, like this is the Pacific Northwest tree octopus, and for the most part, let's critically analyze this. Is this true? Is this, like, how do we find out? And so they look at authors and so on, but ultimately what students choose is like, if you know that cephalopods don't climb trees, that's all you have to do, but that's not for the most part a compelling argument or something that's scalable to all other information on the web. It's something that's a bit of a straw man for the most part. Then we have check sheets like this. We have currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. And of course, for the one, you're not going to do this on every single resource on the web. And there's all sorts of problems with that. What is currency today? And should we be obsessed with speed? What is the relationship between relevance and confirmation bias? It might be relevant to you or relevant to your search, but it may not actually be true. What about authority relative today? Who has authority? Do we trust our authority figures, for instance? What if accuracy or truth is less important than belief and difficult to assess when purpose is to deceive? So thinking about the problems with checklists like this is really important. Not that they're not used well in some cases, they're not just designed to be used well for the most part. So you see, just getting examples like this. This is one that is fairly, simple. Students will talk about these sort of things and examples of people who kind of get messed up with this. So there's lots of really good examples of things you can use in classrooms or just everyday scams and hoaxes, and there's tons of them on the internet. Or I showed this at OEB a couple years ago. This is one of my favorites. This is just a video on a fairly credible site. Actually, this is the only non-credible video on the entire site, but they wanted to mix things up. So they took an onion, they soaked it in Gatorade, plugged in an iPod, and basically were able to show you how they can charge this iPod. And it was really, really compelling, but it doesn't actually work. But the comments were really interesting. Everyone in the comments was also in on the trick. They're like, because they probably got messed up by it, and they'd say, "This is amazing, it saved me $50. So everyone is in on the joke in some ways, convincing other people to do the same thing. But again, when I ask students to do this, they say, well, how would you know? And they say, well, you can try it, and which is great, but you can't try everything, right? There's if even the spoon one before, you probably don't want to try it to see if that's a good way of doing it. Other examples, so you see political propaganda. You see an example like this. Even a reverse Google image search on something like this would find you this example, right? Or even finding the beginnings of videos. So for instance, this is a video that was popularized where I think it's the Polish First Lady, I believe, goes past and shakes hands with Melania on Democratic sites. That's where you saw the video end, and so it was like, look at Trump getting dissed or whatever in this case. But then, if you saw the video a bit longer, you would actually see. So people who were Democratic pundits would basically kind of get burnt by the video in some ways because they didn't see the whole video and they're not seen as being critical. So finding the source of the full video is something really important when we start to look at examples like this. Even sites like Know Your Meme are really important ones. So this is where, and memes actually comes from Richard Dawkins, from the study of memetics. It's the idea of how ideas spread through our societies. So Know Your Meme, I wouldn't necessarily use it with students because there's some bad content, but you can certainly use it as if you want to find out where certain ideas come from. So my students will do things like this. So I don't know if you heard of John Podesta, but there are some emails that were leaked from him during a hack by WikiLeaks. And my students kind of outline where this information comes from, what these stories are about. So it went to a fake journal, a fake lawyer from New York that was a fake account. Then I went to 4chan and Reddit, created this conspiracy of this sort of this pedophilia ring at a Comet pizza place in New York City, which actually was on Facebook enough that this guy from North Carolina grabbed a gun and decided to shoot up the place. Like, this is what happens to fake news. And seeing the origin and genesis of these types of stories is really, really an important skill. Thinking like the web, and I'll give you a couple of other examples before I close up here. Things like this, thinking more like journalists, for instance. This is actually something that's not created for information literacy classrooms, but there's a lot to gain here. So this is the verification handbook. It's actually used for a humanitarian crisis and journalists covering those particular spaces, but it talks about like how do you verify whether a YouTube video is true or fake, where it's been uploaded and so on. Like, it looks at solid, factual, objective techniques of seeing whether media is fake or false. Or is false or true. And it's actually got a number of different translations as well. The one that I would really like to point to is by Michael Caulfield. This is something, again, a free book. Both are free. Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers, which I would really recommend. It talks about 4 moves and a habit. So I'll go through those really quickly. Number one, looking for understanding that there is work out there already done. Things like Snopes and others have done some of the work for you, so checking that out. Going upstream, if you see a screenshot of a tweet like this, there's easy ways to create tweets, the tweet generators out there. So finding out whether or not this actually happened would be going upstream to a source, right? That's an example. Reading laterally, which is sort of the new buzz term. It's the idea that you should never spend much time on a source if you don't understand the reliability of that source. Don't waste your time on a source if you don't know what the bias is, for instance. So they actually looked at, there was an interesting study that took 45 individuals, and I'll get to the verdict here, but ultimately those fact checkers were the ones that were most accurate with those information literacy. Not the historians, not the students, but the fact checkers. Their methodologies actually work better to verify whether information is true or not. I thought that was interesting. Check your emotions, something that we really have to get better at, especially when you look at partisan or nonpartisan news. When you feel strong emotion, happiness, anger, pride, vindication, and that emotion pushes you to share a fact with others, whether it's in person, whether it's on social media. Stop, above all, it's those things you must fact check. We are also part of the fake news problem, and the way that we share implicates what others read and what others believe, and so we have to get it right, and we have to convince our students to get it right and get beyond the emotionality. Last thing. Nurturing a critical disposition, I think, is key in all of this. And Hemingway talked about this some years ago. Every man, sorry for the gender piece here, but it's old. Every man should have a built-in automatic crap detector operating inside of him. And he didn't actually use the word crap. He used something a little more worse than that. But so it's in a number of different ways. But I think about my back to my kids. One time I was in a store, and I understand the problems we have with this age. My son asked me, where do bananas hang? Do bananas grow tips up or tips down? Like, it was the best story, best little question that, like, my son, I think he was 6 at the time, could ask. And right away, I just checked it on Google because I'm super dad and I can do that sort of thing, and I've had an answer with him in seconds. But I always felt bad about that. This was a number of years ago. I never stopped to think. And one of the things that I have to get better at, and I continue to get better at, is making sure that before solving problems, don't trust the first information you find. Make sure that you actually show your critical methodologies, the way that you actually think and construct truth, that the way that you come to truth. And so I wrote a kind of a blog post at the time. It was out of guilt for the most part. This was many years ago, but I've really stopped that idea of just doing that sort of thing and not modeling correctly. Couple of last slides. I think I'm at my minute here. There's a really great definition from APA 1990 on criticality, on the idea of being a critical thinker. But this idea, do we have this in our students still? To be habitually inquisitive, to be well-informed, trustful of reason, honest in facing personal biases, willing to reconsider, divergent in seeking relevant information, focused in inquiry. Like, there's lots of guidance there, even from 1990, that if we're going to get this right, we need to nurture those particular spaces. Last one. This is a blog post that one of my favorites that I've ever read, and it's about a professor who basically a student who was recalling his favorite professor. And he remembered his professor coming into class, and he said to his class, "Between today until the class right before finals, it is my intention to work into every one of my lectures one lie. Your job as students, among the others, is to try and catch me in the lie of the day." And students were more engaged. They actually felt that, like everything that's served to you, you just take in as for granted. But when they actually were tasked to see what was the lie, they were much more engaged in the process. And then at the end of the class, which I really liked, is that no one could figure out the lie of the last day. And until he finally figured out, do you remember the first lecture, how I said that every lecture has a lie? Well, that was a lie. All right. So that's where I'll leave it. If you have any, want to learn more from me or get these slides, couros@gmail.com, couros.ca. Thanks for listening. And if there's any questions, I can stick around as long as you want. Thanks.